I stepped out of the crisp night air and into the warm glow of the old lighthouse, the beams slicing through the darkness like a scythe. It was 2 a.m. on a stormy night, and the island was bathed in an eerie, pulsing light. I had been summoned to the scene by the local sheriff, who had been called by the lighthouse keeper's frantic wife. As I climbed the winding stairs, the air grew thick with the smell of salt and smoke. At the top, I found the keeper, Arthur Wilson, lying in a pool of blood, a look of shock frozen on his face. Arthur was a well-respected member of the island community, a former sailor who had spent his life at sea before settling down to tend the light. He was a kind man, loved by all who knew him, and his murder sent shockwaves through the small island. As I began to investigate, I found that Arthur had many friends, but also a few enemies. There were 5 people who stood out as suspects, each with a strong motive for the crime. First, there was Emily, Arthur's wife, who stood to gain a large sum of money from his death. She had been planning to leave him, but the insurance policy would give her the freedom she desired. Then, there was Jack, the island's rival lighthouse keeper, who had a long-standing feud with Arthur over whose light was the most important. Next, I spoke to Sarah, a young and ambitious journalist who had been researching a story on the island's history, and Arthur had refused to give her access to the lighthouse's archives. I also interviewed Tom, a local fisherman who had been in a dispute with Arthur over fishing rights. And finally, there was Rachel, a reclusive artist who lived on the island and had a fascination with the lighthouse, but Arthur had forbidden her from using it as a subject for her paintings. As I examined the crime scene, I found a few physical clues that seemed insignificant at first, but could prove to be crucial. A piece of torn fabric caught in the lantern room's door, a suspicious smudge of paint on the railing, and an empty matchbook with a strange symbol on the cover. But what did they mean? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Now, it's time for you to take a closer look at the evidence and see if you can piece together the events of that fateful night. Take a moment to consider the suspects, the motives, and the clues. Who do you think killed Arthur Wilson? Pause the video, think carefully, and see if you can solve the crime. As I continued my investigation, I discovered a surprising twist. The torn fabric caught in the door belonged to a jacket that Emily, the wife, had been wearing earlier that day. But when I questioned her, she had a solid alibi. The paint smudge on the railing matched the color of Rachel's paints, but she claimed she had never been to the lighthouse that night. And the matchbook with the symbol? It belonged to Jack, the rival lighthouse keeper, but he swore he had lost it days ago. But then, I found a hidden logbook in Arthur's office, detailing a dark secret. Arthur had discovered that the island's history, which Sarah was researching, was not what it seemed. The island had a hidden past, one that involved a tragic event that had been covered up for decades. And Arthur had been about to expose it all. The killer, it turned out, was not who I expected. It was Sarah, the journalist, who had been using her research as a cover to silence Arthur and keep the island's dark secret buried. The symbol on the matchbook was a signal, a warning to the other islanders who knew about the secret. The paint smudge was a red herring, meant to mislead me. And the torn fabric? That was just a clever plant, meant to throw me off Emily's trail. But it was Sarah's own research that had ultimately led me to her. The story she had been working on was not just a story, but a way to keep the truth hidden. As I closed the case, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the island held. And I knew that I would be back, to uncover more of the island's dark past. The storm outside had passed, but the darkness on the island was far from over. I am Detective Cole. And this has been Murder in the Dark.